Let's take a tour around the Singer Fashion Mate 3342 sewing machine. So we've already gotten it threaded and the bobbin wound. So let's just talk about some of the dials and where they should be set at and what options you have for changing stitches. So while you're sewing, starting over here on this side, this is your reverse button. So when you hold it down, the feed dogs will pull your fabric in the opposite direction, and this will allow you to have a locking stitch at the beginning and end of your fabric. This will allow you to have a locking stitch at the beginning and end of any seam. You can just hold it down, it stitches away from you and then back over itself. And then when you pull this out, you don't have any stitches that are going to come loose at the beginning of the seam. So something to get in the habit in, do a reverse stitch at the beginning and end of every stitch. As we come over here, we have stitch length, and depending on what stitch you're actually on, will depending on what your stitch length will be. So let's just start off. If you are on a stitch that you want to be using the black colored stitch width, not the red or blue, then you're going to be somewhere between 0 and 4 for stitch length. And that's something that you can actually adjust while you sew. So that's really nice to know. And this little picture here between 0 and 1 indicates a picture of a buttonhole, which would mean if you are stitching a buttonhole, then you will want to be somewhere in that range. So stitch 1, see if it's the look that you're looking for, and then adjust from there. So stitch length depends on how thick your fabric is. So if you're working on a very thick hem or a denim seam, you're going to want a longer stitch length, be in the 3+ range. Middle of the road is about 2.5, and then if you're working on some lighter weight fabrics, you don't need such a long stitch length. You want to tighten it up a little bit. So again, try out all the different settings for stitch length on all your stitches, and you'll get a nice variety of what it looks like when they look longer or shorter. Now, if you do want the stitch that's actually in the blue or red, that's when you're going to turn it all the way over to the blue S1 or red S2. So if you're on a blue S1, and S stands for stretch, those stretch stitches will be what you get. And so whatever you're on, that's what you're going to sew. Now, some of these stitches look like they are wider than a straight stitch. So if there's any width involved, you're going to come up to this dial here. And if you turn it all the way to 6, that's your widest setting. And if you have it in the 1 or 2 range, that's going to be very, very narrow. So just keep that in mind. If it doesn't look like much, maybe add some width. And if it just looks like a straight stitch and not what you were expecting, it's because you left it on 0 wiggle for left and right. So just find what works. Now this is also, let's turn it back to a straight stitch, this is also needle position. So right now, if it's at 6, you'll notice your needle is all the way to the far left. And if it's all the way at 0, and there's a little picture with a kind of oval with a dot in it, that will indicate your needle's in the center position of your foot. I like to sew with the needle in the center position. So if you've added width and you go back to a straight stitch, your needle's going to be slightly offset. So regular sewing, be at 0 up here, stitch length 2.5. That should get you a nice little starting point. And then let's talk tension. Tension is where you would adjust if you had a different weight of thread in your needle than you do in your bobbin. So today, obviously, I wound my bobbin with the thread that I'm using in my needle. So those are the same weight of thread. At that point, go ahead and just leave it at 4. There's kind of this happy medium between 3, 4, and 5. 4 is a nice little middle of the road and not something I change a lot unless I am working with a different thickness of thread in my needle and different than what is in the bobbin. So we'll get into a couple things of when you're adjusting tension. Tension is not something that you adjust when you're having like stitch issues or your threads breaking or something. Don't blame tension for that. That is actually just a good old, you need to change the needle, you need to clean out from underneath the machine. Though your machine is not threaded correctly, there's a lot of other things that need to be looked at and corrected before you actually start touching your tension. So I know it gets blamed for a lot of things. On this new machine of yours, let's avoid that. And then just leave it at 4 for most of your sewing. So that's just a quick little overview. We'll be using all these different knobs and stitches in all of our videos so you can see all the potential that this machine has.